Hey everybody, what's going on? I am Gregg joined today by Jim Sonis of FanDuel, who's going to help us break down Week 3 when it comes to DFS. What's happening, Jim?
It's all good, Greg. I think that this week 3 slate is a little bit easier for me to figure out than the week 2 slate. There are more games I want to stack. There are more teams that are obvious big favorites. So pretty easy slate to diagnose, which definitely helps things out. And some pretty fun plays too. So I am great. How are you?
I'm feeling good, man. I'm 0-2 in almost all my leagues, which means it's time to turn to DFS. So this is the perfect time to do this.
Regression is your friend, Greg. Things will wind up well, but that's what DFS is here for. It's always a new week, and it should be a fun one. So I'm glad to have you fully on board here for week 3.
I'm ready to rock. So let's start building my lineup. I need to start building with some stacks. Let's begin in Arizona, where it's been really easy to predict. It's Kyler Murray to Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk. Kind of makes our lives easier here, Jim.
Yeah, there's a lot of value in knowing where the ball is going in pretty much any offense. So we want to find situations like that. But when the offense is throwing the ball 50 times per game and doing so with kind of surprising levels of efficiency, it's pretty encouraging. And I think that this Cardinals offense is in its best situation it's had so far this year going up against Carolina, because Detroit is a team that runs the ball a lot, wants to play keep away, and suppresses volume for the opposing team. Baltimore, less so this year because they're letting Lamar Jackson throw, but still a team that takes away volume for the opposing team. And despite some weird matchups and some decent defenses, the Cardinals have come out looking pretty good, and now they go back home and face the Panthers. Panthers defense not bad either, but they are a pace-up team in general. That's good for Arizona. So I expect a lot of play volume in this game, which bodes well for Kyler Murray. He was $7,200. Didn't have any touchdowns last week, but I think that is certainly something he is capable of. He looked really good in that Baltimore game. They were without Jimmy Smith and Tavion Young, but still a good game for Kyler Murray. And like you said, we know where the ball is going. Larry Fitzgerald so far this year has had 13 and 11 targets in his 2 games. A lot of those have been deep down the field. We know Fitz can score touchdowns as well, and he's only $5,900. So within this Cardinals team, I think Kyler Murray is a cash game consideration. Larry Fitzgerald, cash game consideration. Christian Kirk. David Johnson is $7,000, which is way too cheap, assuming that wrist is okay, which it seemed like it was later in that game on Sunday. So I think that all those guys are in play for cash games. I would consider any and all of them. But I think that my favorite stack here is going to be Kyler Murray paired up with Larry Fitzgerald.
You said it at the beginning right there and then. There is value in knowing where the ball's going. We know it's going to Christian Kirk, and we know it's going to Larry Fitzgerald, who once again has found the fountain of youth here. He's come alive again with Cliff Kingsbury. So get him in your lineup and pair him with Kyler Murray. Well, that was a less than obvious stack. The most obvious stack? Well, that's in Kansas City, where you compare Patrick Mahomes up with, well, anybody. Last week, your guy was McCole Hardman. It worked out all right. This week, you go back to Sammy Watkins, probably because everybody else is on the other guys.
Yeah, it's also because Sammy Watkins is weirdly cheap. He checks in at $7,100 on FanDuel this week, which means he probably will be pretty popular, even though he didn't do a whole lot last week because he's just too cheap. But when you can find guys who are just underpriced, and we can get, decently priced exposure to an offense that's good, I'm going to take it every time. Sammy Watkins, $7,100, and that is despite getting 13 targets last week. He has 31% of the Chiefs' targets through 2 games, and you would expect really good performances when that is the case. So I love Sammy Watkins for this week. Patrick Mahomes is $9,200, and yeah, that's expensive, but this is a great game with a super high total, and I would expect it to shoot out. And you look at this Ravens defense, and normally that's a defense we try to avoid, but as mentioned with the Cardinals, they don't have Tavion Young, and Jimmy Smith seems likely to miss as well. It's a pretty major downgrade. We did see Christian Kirk and Larry Fitz do pretty well against them. So I'm not going to talk you out of stacking Patrick Mahomes with anyone. Travis Kelce is $8,000. He is always in play. And of course, you can always go back to Demarcus Robinson with his high snap rate last week, or Mecole Hardman, that long touchdown getting called back by penalty hurt, but I think that it does bode well for him this week. So you can stack, Mahomes with anyone, but I think from a point per dollar perspective, Watkins is my favorite. I will not be alone in that, but I think it still makes sense in a game that I really want to stack up this week.
You can't go wrong pairing Patrick Mahomes with anybody, and that includes any of the pass catchers and, well, the tight end too, of course, and Travis Kelce. This week, Jim says Sammy Watkins is the guy that you can trust more than anybody. The Chiefs are the best offense in the NFL. You obviously want a piece. This week, make sure it's with Watkins. Let's continue on pairing up quarterbacks and wide receivers, and that brings us to Baltimore, where arguably the league's MVP through the first 2 weeks has been Lamar Jackson. In week 1, we saw a whole lot of Hollywood Brown. And now maybe people are a little off him, going with Mark Andrews as the stack. Are you going back to Hollywood?
Yeah, I'll go with Mark Andrews too. I don't really care. I'll go with anyone here because I think this is just a really fun game. And you look at this spot for the Ravens. Yes, they've started things off with 2 ideal matchups, facing the Dolphins and facing the Cardinals without Patrick Peterson, Robert Alford. Those are 2 ideal spots. But now they go on the road to face a defense that is not great, but they also get a pace-up spot against Kansas City. So I think it's still a good situation to keep on attacking Baltimore until we get them in a situation where things are a bit less rosy. Now, KC is much better in Kansas City than they are on the road from a defensive perspective, but still, I don't think it matters all that much, especially with Hollywood Brown being just $6,100. We mentioned in week 1 that his snap rate was super low, but it seemed like that was because of the game flow and also because of that injury he's coming off of in the preseason. The last week, the second week, in week 2, we saw Marquise Brown get 13 targets, and 4 of those targets were at least 15 yards downfield. One of those was an absolute dime for Lamar Jackson on the sideline, a beautiful throw, and he's facing this Chiefs secondary, and I don't think they can keep up with him because he's just crazy fast, and we've seen the playing time expand for Hollywood Brown. Lamar Jackson seems to trust him quite a bit. So Marquise Brown at $6,100 is one of the better wide receiver plays on the board. As far as Lamar Jackson goes, he's up to $8,500, which is certainly a lot, but he also ran 16 times last week for 120 yards. We know the rushing floor is there. The rushing upside is there too, but he's shown so much potential as a passer with Andrews and with Marquise Brown that I think he makes just as much sense as Patrick Mahomes. I'd probably rather go Mahomes because he's Patrick freaking Mahomes at home. But Lamar Jackson with that rushing floor, with the rushing upside, and with what he's doing as a passer, I know he's had ideal spots so far, but I don't think this one's that bad either. So I'm going to keep on going with Lamar Jackson, and I do prefer to stack him with Hollywood Brown by a hair over Mark Andrews.
As you said, you can't go wrong with whomever you choose between Mark Andrews or Hollywood Brown. But by a slight margin, you're going to go with Marquise Brown this week. And Lamar Jackson, the rushing upside, that's what's cool because it's still to come. He's been so good throwing the ball that floor that we were a little nervous about, it's a lot bigger now, given the rushing ability and the trust we now have in that throwing shoulder. The Baltimore Ravens, oddly enough, a safe stack. Also a safe stack, anybody playing the Dolphins this week is the Dallas Cowboys, who are a 21.5-point favorite. So you know you want the Cowboys defense, and you know you want the Cowboys rushing attack. That's what makes putting Ezekiel Elliott as the first player in your lineup so easy.
Yeah, I think you could have some justifiable concerns here about the Cowboys just winning this game by too much and not needing Zeke Elliott all that much. But in order to be blowing a team out, you got to score points, and Zeke Elliott will probably be involved if they do wind up doing so. So for $8,800, I think that Zeke is a really good play. And also one thing that I think helps Zeke that may go a bit overlooked is that Michael Gallup is likely to miss this game. And Gallup has gotten a lot of targets through the first 2 weeks, and Zeke has not. Even when he had his snap rate go up in week 2, Zeke still had just 2 targets. And targets for a running back are worth quite a bit. So with Gallup being out, that opens up some volume in the passing game for Zeke, which I love, given that we have not seen that yet so far this year. The Dolphins are a team that's probably going to get wiped, and Zeke Elliott will be involved in the process. As far as the Cowboys defense goes, yeah, they're expensive at $5,000, but I think that there's a lot of talent on this team, both in the secondary and on the defensive line, and they're probably going to get after the Dolphins quite a bit. So I want to go at both sides here. I think that Zeke is certainly expensive at $8,800, as is the Cowboys defense, but they're worth it. They're a super high floor stack and one that has a good ceiling as well.
Absolutely. I get it. The concerns that Zeke won't play all game because they won't need him. But as we always say in these situations, they got to get those points first, right? Like, they have to get up there. So, to me, Zeke's going to do his thing early and then maybe rest late. The Cowboys defense, they're going to be strong all game long. The Dallas Cowboys are as safe as a play as of any team in the league this week. Make sure you stack your lineup with plenty of Cowboys. Let's continue on here, Jim, and that brings us to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are facing off against Danny Dimes and the New York Giants. Jameis Winston called himself a game manager after last Thursday night's win against Carolina, and he's focused on Chris Godwin. Yet, you're stacking your lineup with Mike Evans and the game manager Winston. How come?
I just think this Giants defense is really bad, and that makes me want to go at everyone facing them, including Jameis Winston. And yeah, he had a pretty good matchup in week 1 against San Francisco and failed there, but San Francisco's defensive line is really good, and something that I think is a detriment and an issue for a Tampa Bay offensive line that is not very good. That's probably why O.J. Howard's been blocking so much, is because they faced 2 good defensive fronts. They're not going to face that this week with the Giants, which should allow O.J. Howard to run more routes, which could allow Jameis Winston to be a bit more efficient. As far as Mike Evans goes, I just like the workload he has gotten. He has not been as productive as Chris Godwin, but he's gotten a lot of volume overall, and a lot of that volume has been down the field. He has 3 deep targets in both games so far, and he has 46% of the team's total deep targets through the first 2 games. And at $7,100, that's pretty attractive. Chris Godwin is 76. He is more expensive than Mike Evans, and I think that is fully justifiable and probably the way that things should be. But it also allows us to buy low on Mike Evans in an offense that wants to attack vertically against a team that will allow vertical shots, even to someone like Cole Beasley, as we saw last week. And yeah, that does mean we want to attack the Giants through the slot, which does lead to Chris Godwin. But I think that Mike Evans makes a lot of sense too. We haven't seen the production there yet, but the volume has been, and now they're in the best matchup they have had all year. So I think this is a good spot to go at Mike Evans. He is $7,100. Jameis Winston is $73. That's a very good number for a quarterback, a bit more expensive than Kyler Murray. So I do prefer Kyler over Jameis, but I think Jameis makes a lot of sense too. So for $7,300, the game manager can come through, and I think against this defense, pretty much anyone can. So give me the Bucs in week number 3.
The Giants defense will make any team look good, and that includes Jameis Winston and the Bucs. I agree. I personally prefer Kyler Murray here, but Jameis Winston, if he's going to get right at all, and Mike Evans is going to get right at all, it's going to be against the Giants. A safe stack as well are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. One last stack to get to, and that brings us to Green Bay, where Aaron Jones made a lot of owners nervous in week 1. In week 2, he really picked it up. So in week 3, which Aaron Jones are we going to get? It's a question fantasy owners have to ask themselves. But it's who you're stacking with that I find pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think if you're still a little bit nervous about Aaron Jones, that is justifiable because Jamal Williams is still playing in obvious passing situations, and he's still getting about 40% of the snaps, which is disappointing. But Aaron Jones, when he's on the field, is getting the ball both as a rusher and as a receiver. And I think that's pretty attractive here against Denver. And you look at the spread in this game, the Packers are 8-point favorites, which leads us to Green Bay's defense. Dean Lowry and all the new signees that the Packers got in free agency, actually spending in free agency, I thought was pretty interesting. And it looks like it's worked out pretty well with the Smith brothers back there. Not brothers, obviously, but the Smiths back there playing good ball so far this year. And I don't think salaries have reflected what we've seen from Green Bay so far, because they are just $4,500. And when they're at home, 8-point favorites against Joe Flacco, I think that's a little bit too low. So I think that they make a lot of sense. Aaron Jones, $6,900. And I think that alleviates some of the concerns we could have around his role. But got a lot of rushing volume last week, also added 6 targets. One of those 6 targets was down the field. He also had 2 targets in the red zone. So the touchdown upside there for Aaron Jones in a peachy spot. We've always seen teams attack Denver via the ground game because their secondary has always been so good. David Montgomery was able to move the ball on the ground last week. Josh Jacobs back in week 1. Aaron Jones is that guy in week number 3. He is a low-cost back who has good usage, gets work in the passing game, and comes with scoring upside as well. You can pair him with his defense pretty easily given this game script. So I am betting on the Packers' defensive talent and what they've done there in this offseason to make that defense click, and also betting on Aaron Jones being a talented guy in a good enough role to come through at this salary. So for $6,900, I will happily pair Jones with the Packers' defense.
The price is right on Aaron Jones. That's kind of what I took out of it here, Jim. And you're right. He is that good, and at price, why not? If the Packers defense can do their job, and they've looked really, really good through the first couple of weeks of the season, then Aaron Jones can be relied upon by Matt LaFleur and by Aaron Rodgers. At $6,500, there's clearly a lot to like. That's going to do it for us here on the FanDuel Hurry Up. Jim, good luck this weekend, but the good news is I'll still talk to you tomorrow.
Yeah, we got a lot of good values on this slate, Greg. So I'm looking forward to being back with you tomorrow. We'll talk more about the Cardinals then for sure. Get some Christian Kirk love on the show because I think that want to make sure he doesn't go overlooked. It should be a fun show tomorrow for sure.
The DFS conversation continues. Thanks so much for watching. Jim and I will be back tomorrow. Have a great night, and we'll see you then.